Hello. Well, if you are listening to me, then the chances are that you are one of the competitors in this weekend's final for the Great British Sailing Challenge taking place at Rutland Water. My name is Andy Rice, one of the co-organisers of the event, and joining me is our principal race officer, Dave Wilkins. So, David, thanks very much for helping me out with this briefing. The idea is that the sailors can get up to speed with most things that they need to know before the Saturday morning. And I should say, I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to put the commentator's curse on it, as they say. But at the moment, the forecast looks pretty good.
Yeah, I've been watching it over the last few days, and certainly wind strength-wise, it looks like medium winds, 10 to 14 knots, with gusts up to around 20. Maybe a bit of rain, but hopefully not too much. So perfect conditions by the looks of it.
Brilliant. So there will also be a briefing on the Saturday morning. Is that correct? If people still want to hear it from you and ask any questions.
Of course, yeah. I think maybe a lot of people won't manage to hear the audio. And so we've published it in the notice of race, so we'll definitely hold the briefing at the time published.
Brilliant. Okay. And once you get out on the water, it's going to be yellow spherical buoys. So that sounds fairly easy. What kind of course configuration are you considering?
Well, because we'll have such a big fleet and varying speeds, the one we found works best is to have a format of trapezoidal course. For those who sailed in the Tiger Trophy, they'll be familiar with what we set, so hopefully it'll work for everybody. So it's a trapezoidal course with a start line, and then we'll also have a finish line and gate, which is outside the start line, so that boats lapping won't interfere with any boats who are still starting. Okay,
brilliant. Yes, and as you say, a fairly familiar setup for anyone who's done the Tiger Trophy. Now, something a little bit different for this one is that we have trackers, GPS trackers, and it's compulsory to carry a provided GPS tracker while afloat. That's sailing instruction number 22. And these can be collected after the briefing in the wet bar each day, and then should be returned after racing each day within protest time. And the tracking helps with spectating, but actually it's also forming a function in terms of some of the prizes that we calculate as well for the Great British Sailing Challenge. And also, David, I know that you're interested from your point of view in terms of whether it provides some sort of backup reference point for counting the laps of boats, which is always a challenge with these multi-class handicap events, I would imagine.
Yes, certainly. For the last Tiger Trophy, when we used the tracking, it was helpful to sort out queries. And, we obviously want to get the absolutely correct results. And, putting it in the wrong number of laps in the results is always one of the things that catches us out at times. So the trackers really help to sort those out quickly. And also, actually, I think we're hoping to be displaying the racing on the big screens in the clubhouse, so people who are there as friends or spectators should get a good view of the racing on both days.
Brilliant. Yes, it is looking good for both days right now. So how many races are you aiming for on the Saturday?
Well, the Saturday is going to be essentially fleet racing and the Sunday pursuit race. So on the Saturday, we're hoping to get 4 races in back-to-back. Now, we're planning to start them in 2 starts because of the numbers of boats. So there'll be maybe around 80 to 100 boats. So it could be a fleet of starts of 40 to 50 boats. So we'll have 2 starts, which we're nominally calling a fast fleet and slow fleet. So they'll be split on PY speeds. I'm not sure at this point in time where the break's going to be, so I won't cover that in this briefing. But it's normally for the Tiger Trophy around 100. So boats like the Phantoms, RS200s, are normally fastest of the slow fleets, and the Fireballs and 470s and RS 400s are the slowest of the fast fleet normally. But
Okay.
that'll be published on the day.
Okay, great. Now talk us through the start line and the flags.
Okay, well, we've designated simple flags: a yellow flag for the fast fleet, a red flag for the slow fleet. And normally I would prefer to start the fast fleet first and the slow fleet second, but we've been requested, and we're going to try to do this for this event. We're going to alternate who starts first. So we'll probably start the fast fleet first, and so that means the yellow class flag will be hoisted at the first of the 5-minute sequences. We do intend to roll straight into the second start, so at the start of the fast fleet in the first race, say, the slow fleet 5-minute will be hoisted. If there's a general recall for the fast fleet, we'll continue with the slow fleet starting sequence, and the fast fleet will just carry on 5 minutes. We'll start them straight after the slow fleet. Okay, so we're not going to delay because of the general recalls, which sometimes we do if we start the fast fleet first. So that's a bonus. But also we felt it was fair to both fleets to give them a chance of being the first off.
Okay, fantastic. And in an ideal world, if the conditions are good, you're aiming for a maximum 4 races back to back.
That's correct. So we're looking for probably we'll need to get a turnaround of about just over an hour for each race. So if we start at 12 o'clock, we should get finished around 4, but it'll probably be closer to 5. So, we have to finish everybody, and there's always a tail, not necessarily the slowest boats, but because we start finishing and then we have to finish everybody. So it takes usually 15 minutes to go through the full finish sequence.
Okay, brilliant. Now, you briefly mentioned recalls. Do you want to say anything more about your approach to recalls and the kind of flags that you might be flying, whether you might be choosing the U flag or others?
Well, the general advice nowadays is to use the U flag on the first start. I've always preferred myself to use the Blue Peter because it's less penal on the first start. But for this type of event, where you really need to try and have the best chance of getting the fleets away, I had considered using the U flag on the first start of every race. Okay. And then if the fleet have a recall, I'll go straight to black flag.
Yes, okay. The U flag seems to be pretty well established these days, and we've got a high quality fleet for this event this weekend at Rutland. So hopefully there's no excuse of current taking anyone over. There's plenty of transits on the shore, so I'm hoping that everyone will be happy with the U flag. Right, and laps. Will there be a display of laps on the board on the race committee boat?
No, I found it's better not to display the number of laps. So you just keep going until we start to finish you. I have in the past used number of laps, and it's actually caused more confusion than it's helpful to do. So we will just. I would expect, based on my experience at the Tiger, that and the size of course we would normally set, it'll probably, for the faster boats, there'll be 3 laps or thereabouts, and for the slower boats, 2 laps. And maybe if there's some very slow boats there, we might only get 1 lap in for them. But mostly for the slow boats, it'll be 2 laps, and mostly for the fast boats. So that's what they should be expecting. But for some of if there's a lot of foiling moths, for example, they may end up getting 5 laps in, while everybody else does 3 laps. But boats like Fireballs and so on, I would expect 420s, 470s, and boats like that, I'd expect them to get 3 laps in, and the 420s and the lasers and so on. Probably 2000s get 2 laps in a race. That's
and
a reasonable expectation.
So how do you make it obvious that the race is drawing to a close? Maybe firstly tell us what target time would you have for the race, for example?
Well, we'll be looking for about a 40-minute race, and one of the things I do try and do is I try and start the finish process when either a leader of either the fast group or the slow group are coming through the line. So you then know that most of, say, for example, the slow group will have done 2 laps, and it just makes it a bit easier to keep control of the number of laps sailed and so on and so forth. So it'll probably be about a 40-minute race. If the first slow boat's coming through after 2 laps in 35 minutes, I would probably start the finish sequence then. And the finish sequence is that standard sailing instructions where we fly the S flag. The only thing I would say is that we normally have to fly it fairly short notice. So very often there's only maybe boats are only 50 yards from the line when we hoist it, because we have to let the line clear of other boats that we want to continue to do another lap. And so it's a little bit of a juggling exercise, deciding when to actually start the finish process off.
Right.
But it's always worked in the Tiger, and it hasn't been a problem. And we hoist the flag on both boats. There's 2 finished boats. There's what was the original start boat, which is at the port end of the finish line, and the main finish boat is at the starboard end of the finish line. And both boats will have the S flag flown. Will let out long, loud hail to indicate it's coming up, and we'll hoot the first boats through the line. We won't continue to hoot boats, so people will need to watch for the S flag is flying later on, and not carry on doing another lap. It's just that we found if we keep having hoots going off, the callers and recorders can't hear what each other is saying, so we just do it for the first few boats.
Okay, lovely.
Hopefully that makes sense to everybody.
Thanks very much for that. And yes, hopefully that has made sense. But of course, there is still the live briefing on the Saturday morning where you can ask David directly if you still need any clarification on this or any other things. And now there's some local rules for people not so familiar with Rutland Water. Tell us, for example, about the Rutland Bell. What is the Rutland Bell and what do we need to know?
Well, the Rutland Bell is a cruise, like a cruise boat. I won't call it a ship, a cruise boat that takes people around the lake and gives people a chance to see what's going on, both sailing, fishing, and the birds and the shoreline. It's big, it's unmanoeuvrable, it has very poor steerage way, and therefore it has right of way at all times. So boats have to keep clear of the Rutland Bell, and you can call water on another boat if you have to tack to clear it, and so on. It's an obstruction, and you have to give it right of way.
Okay. Now, fishing boats. There are fishing boats on the water. What do we need to know about them?
Well, the fishing boats are normally just small clinker-built dinghies with an outboard on the back, and when they're motoring, they have to give right of way. But when they're actually drifting, fishing, they're normally drifting, and you have to keep clear of them. They have no control. They're just a floating obstruction at that point. And it's suggested that you give 50 metres clearance, because there'll be casting lines and so on. They can cast for even more than 50 metres. So the guideline is to steer clear of them by 50 metres, because they may be casting lines just as you're coming past them.
Okay. And also, I understand this probably doesn't apply so much for the racing on Saturday, but it might apply more for the pursuit race on Sunday. But tell us about the restrictions on sailing through the areas of moored boats.
Okay, well, if you look from in front of the clubhouse and you look both to the left, which is the west, and right, which is the east, there's 2 bays, and there are boats that are moored in those bays, particularly on the west side. There's a lot of boats moored. And it's a rule that boats should not pass through boats in the where there are moorings. So it will only be for the pursuit race. As you come down towards one of the lines is always the race hut, just at the left-hand end of the clubhouse. And so you may be coming either from either side and going close to the moored boats. You must go outside the moored boats, otherwise you can be disqualified.
Okay. Now, so we're also going to come on to some specifics of the pursuit race in a moment. But once the racing is completed on Saturday afternoon, the plan is for people to come ashore. So you're saying, David, probably that's going to be around 5 o'clock. Now we've got a dinner lined up with Rutland's caterers, Nick and Caroline. So for £10 per person, it's a 2-course meal. It's going to be roast chicken or some vegetarian alternatives, followed by a choice of dessert after that. So hopefully that's going to make people feel well nourished after a good day out on the water. It's £10 if you sign up in advance on the booking form, or it's £12 on the day, because obviously the caterers would like to know sooner than later how many they're going to be catering for. But in between getting off the water and having dinner, we also want to do a little bit of a sort of I don't know, you can't say Miss World these days, can you? Because Miss World's very out of fashion. But basically we want the sailors to present their boats. So we want the sailors to get ashore, drop their sails, get changed, get warm and dry, but don't put their boats away quite yet, because we want you, the sailors, to sort of give us an elevator pitch. We'll give you 20 seconds to sell your boat. Why should I be interested in sailing your kind of boat? Because typically during the Selden Sail Juice Winter Series, for example, and the Great British Sailing Challenge is going the same way as well, we get about 100 different types of boat competing throughout the year, which is why the kind of handicap racing that you run, David, is so important to UK dinghy sailing. So we want to celebrate that by having this kind of elevator pitch where we'll run along the line of boats and see who has the best pitch for their boat. So hopefully that will be a bit of fun. And then we have dinner, and then straight after dinner we're going to have a discussion about the future of dinghy racing in the UK. So we hope that the Great British Sailing Challenge will be established as part of that future. We see that the Selden Sail Juice Winter Series will continue doing what it does, but there are lots of other good ideas out there, and some of the One Design classes do things very differently to others. So we want to pitch in with ideas and get a sense from people who are very active in the scene, which by definition anyone who's going to be racing at the finals of the Great British Sailing Challenge is definitely active. And there are lots of good ideas out there. We just want to share them in that forum. So we're quite excited about what might come out of that. So I think it's going to be a fun evening, and hopefully quite enlightening. And then we kick into the Sunday. So then we've got the pursuit race on Sunday, David. So tell us, what are the different things that people need to know that compared with the fleet racing on the Saturday? For example...
Okay.
What's the kick-off time?
Well, first of all, the kick-off time is 11 o'clock, and it's the slowest boats start first, and there'll be a table on the racing on the board for you to see after start zero, if I could call it that, for the slowest boat in the fleet. What time that you have to start, and there's a big clock on the back of the committee boat which shows. So the race will start at 11:00, and it'll count up 11:00:00. So it'll count up the seconds, and each time it clocks over a minute, another group of boats will be able to start until the last boats would be the foiling moths, which will be about an hour or more later. So they set off. The race length is 150 minutes, so 2.5 hour race, and the times that you'll see for your start will be on the notice board. And then the finish will, of course, be precisely at 1:30. So start at 11 o'clock and finish at 1:30, 150 minutes later. And the boat that's in the front of the fleet at that point will be the winner.
And then just to clarify what sailors will be looking at as they're looking to cross their particular, the line at their particular start time, what advice do you have in terms of how people gauge that? For example, I always tend to take note of a class that's starting 3 or 5 minutes in front of me and using that as my 3 or 5 minute countdown. But how obvious do you make it out on the water?
Well, it's definitely very important to take note of what your start time is. So if you're starting at 11 minutes, 11:15, then you would definitely need to. It's a good idea to take note of the boats who are starting just in front of you, knowing which boats are starting in front and when. But the key thing is to make a note of what your start time is, and if it's 11:15, when the clock ticks goes 11:14, 59, 11:15, 00, that is your start. Okay, so as long as you know what your start time is, you can see it's a very large clock that's digital clock that's displayed out towards the back of the committee boat. Now, in terms of getting there on time, I normally set the start line reasonably close to the clubhouse, so it's not a big long sail out to the dam or anything like that. It's usually either, depending if it's a southwesterly, which it very often is, then the start is normally over the other side of the south arm opposite the clubhouse, or maybe a little bit up or down from the clubhouse, and then you set off and head up up the south arm in a southwesterly direction for the first mark, which would be a beating start. Beating first leg is the intention. So hopefully it'll be fairly close to the clubhouse, but you do need to give yourself plenty of time to get out there, see what's going on, get yourself organised. But the most important thing is to take a note of your start time, and then you can judge it from the clock. But as Andy says, it's also a good idea, just a reminder, if you're starting 2 or 3 minutes behind the 420s, then once they start, you should be getting into racing mode and ready to get the boat set up and so on. You'll be starting fairly soon.
Now, one of
the other thing, actually, which...
Go on, David. No, you go
Andy. Well, I was going to say, the other thing that's very useful is we always have a lead rib that follows the leading boat around the course. And we fly a fairly large flag. I'm not sure what it's normally a white flag with various things on it, but it's a large flag, and I'll try and have it at the briefing for the pursuit race. And it'll be on a pole which is on the rib, so you should be able to see it virtually from anywhere on the course. So you always should be able to see which is the boat that's leading, or you can see the rib at least, which would be within 50 meters of the boat that's leading the race. So you know how, if you're on a fast boat and you're trying to catch up, you know where the leading boat is and what you have to do before the end of the race. So that's a very useful guide for you to know who is the leading boat and how far you've got to get to catch up with the leading boat.
Okay, great. And just thinking about courses and things like that, and writing the course down in advance, how complex or simple are you thinking of making the course for the pursuit race?
Well, we normally have about 6 marks on the course, and I normally like to make it somewhere around 40 minutes or so long, just to try and minimise the amount of boats that have actually already completed a lap before even some boats have started. You can't avoid that, because when you've got fast boats like Moths and maybe some catamarans and very fast, international 14s and stuff like that, it's almost impossible to do that. But at least if you've only got a few boats that have already been lapped, or actually have to unlap themselves before they really start even, it's not too bad. So it'll be a fairly long course. So I'll use, depending on the wind, if it's the sort of strength that's forecasted, I'll use probably a good chunk of the South Arm and a good chunk of the main pond. But what I try and do is get at least 2 windward legs on it, a couple of reaching legs, and some good downwind legs for the asymmetrics to use. So try and get a good balance of legs, and hopefully the wind doesn't change direction, because one of the problems, you can't change the course once the race starts.
That's very true. Now, probably doesn't happen very often, but let's say there is a recall. Individual recall, that's just normal. That's an X flag, and the boat that's impinged would go back round and restart. Although it's important that you go back around the outside of the line. You can't just dive back through the line. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, you have to, if you're over the line, the line will be fairly short, because obviously there's probably only going to be maybe typically 5 to 10 boats on the line, especially for this event. Sometimes for the Tiger Trophy, we get maybe 25, 30, 40 420s or 29ers or whatever, and they can often be quite feisty on the line, but we should be not have more than about 10 boats in any one start, I would think, maybe even less than that.
Less than that, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, so, but you must go round the end. You can't duck back. We'll use the P flag, so we're not going to be using the U flag for the pursuit race start. So you can actually, before the start line, you can duck back, but if you're over the line after the start, you have to go around the ends and come back that way.
Okay. General recall, I don't see us having a general recall because we don't have. I mean, by the nature of the boat, the event we've organised, we've only got 2 or 3 boats in each class, but that would be a restart 3 minutes after your original start time. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's extremely penal if you have a general recall, because to lose 3 minutes, you're effectively having to sail 3 minutes longer just to catch up. So it is something as a class to be avoided.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's hypothetical. Really.
It doesn't happen very often.
No.
Yeah.
Now, finishing, that's a pretty critical thing. Tell us how that's going to work out for this pursuit race.
Okay, so, well, of course, I would say up front that we do have the benefit of the trackers, which will help us to record where every boat finishes and who's finishing in front of whom. But what we do to finish is at the finish, we of course have the rib that's following the leading boat, so we know who that is, which is obviously very important. And so we get 2 ribs, so it'll be the lead rib and another rib will finish the leading boat and then motor down through the fleet to finish as many boats as possible through the rib. But we also we'll have boats on each of the rounding marks who will be finishing boats. So if you are not finished by the 2 ribs, you must go to the next rounding mark and they will finish you, and that will give you your finishing place. So you must go to the next rounding mark, because inevitably boats are somewhere between one buoy and the next buoy. They're never, very rarely exactly at the buoy at exactly at the finish time. So the only way we can finish every boat is to go to the next mark and get the finish. And I've asked the finished boats to give a hoot as everybody goes past.
Okay, great. And you should also, tell us about the sign-off process once you get ashore, because that sort of ties in as well.
Okay. Well, I'm sure this won't happen this time, but let's say one or two sailors can be a little bit naughty, because we do say that you must slow down after the time of the finish has gone and not overtake a slower boat. I know the temptation is great for a fireball who's whizzing up and comes up to a laser and just goes straight past it after the finish time, but that's not the game. It's that you hang back and you finish at the next boat. So part of the reason for just checking that this has happened is if people record the boat that's in front of them, the class and the number, and the boat that's behind them exactly at the time of the finish, then we have a cross-reference that we can use if anybody feels that they've been passed by faster boats and that wasn't fair and in the rules. I should also say that we do have the benefit this year in this event of the trackers, so we can always check the trackers, and I'll be very disappointed if we find that having recorded people at a mark, we then go back to the tracker and find that a particular boat has overtaken 3 or 4 slower boats between the finish of the race and the next mark.
Right. Well, I'm glad you've made that point. I don't think everyone who does these races necessarily knows that they should slow down. If you don't do pursuit races very often, maybe some people don't know, but we've made it clear here in this briefing, and we'll make it clear again on the weekend, so that there should be no confusion about that, and people should understand that at 1:30, at the finish time of the race, wherever you are on the race course, you do your best to maintain your position with the boats around you. Now, so that's pretty much the end of the regatta. So we'll come ashore, people will pack up, and we'll have a prize giving. But there's a note about do not wash out boats. What's that about, David?
Well, I think most people know probably most people who'll be coming to the event will have sailed at various inland clubs, and there's a great deal of concern about these kind of shrimps and other nasty things that are in the water that are contaminating both the water and the wildlife and the fish life that's in the various lakes and reservoirs. So most stretches of water now have this rule about not washing out the boat, and so you take the boat away as it comes off the water. Obviously, you can drain out any loose water, but we don't want people washing out the boats, because if there were shrimps or something, at the moment Rutland water is supposedly clear, and we believe it's clear because nothing's ever been found there. But for example, Grafham is not. So if somebody has been to Grafham and the next weekend they come to Rutland and they wash out their boat, they may wash shrimps into the water, and all of a sudden Rutland's contaminated.
Okay.
So that's what we don't want, people washing out the boats.
Great. Well, David, thank you very much for that, and thanks for listening. Just so you know, because David would be far too humble to say himself, but David, you have won an Olympic silver medal, and you've run numerous Tiger trophies. So I'm so pleased to have you as the principal race officer for this event, because this event couldn't be in better hands. So thanks in advance, David. I'm sure it's going to be a great weekend, and I know that Rutland is going to put on a great show. So I look forward to seeing you, David. I look forward to seeing you, the competitors, at this weekend's final of the Great British Sailing Challenge.
Okay, thank you, and good luck to everybody.